Good morning, eighth graders, or good afternoon, depending on when you're watching this. I just wanted to give a quick review of our lesson from Wednesday and Thursday. Yesterday, so I'm filming this on Thursday. Yesterday, Wednesday, we went over and revised our introductions, counterclaims, and conclusions. The goal for you would be to have pretty much a final draft ready to go by today/tomorrow. One of the reasons that we want that is because it is obviously due by the end of class tomorrow. If you need an extension, if you're at home, please contact me. I've talked to a few of you. Some of you have not reached out about an extension, so I'm just planning on that you are following along and have your outline almost completed or have your flash draft almost completed. So we're going to go over that really quick, and then I'm going to talk to you about what our classwork was today. Again, it's pretty much a review and a little bit of work time. So the first thing that we talked about was this idea of introductions. You want to make sure that you are grabbing the reader's attention. That's oftentimes called a hook. It's symbolic of hooking a fish and bringing it in, right? So you're trying to engage your reader and keep them reading your essay. This can come in the form of a compelling fact, a statistic, a quote even, that relates to your topic. Then after that, you want to provide some context for the position that you are taking and just the argument in general. So maybe you're going to define what actionable change is, and just helping the reader understand what you're going to be talking about, right? So we spent a lot of time with actionable change and defining it, but your reader might not. And so you have to assume that they aren't as knowledgeable on the topic as you are, because that's oftentimes the case, right? And then your last two sentences are just going to be your thesis, which is people can achieve actionable change, and then you preview your reasons, right? So you picked from things like protest, pointing to facts, open letter, negotiation. I'm just reading off of our essential question. What is the best way to achieve actionable change? We created that list together, and so you picked 3 from there. Here is an example of an introduction. This is from a speech written by an 8th grader about allowing kids to game and the skills that it teaches them. And so it says here, as many of my audience know, I'm a gamer. I play laser tag and paintball and Call of Duty. My friends game, my dad games. So you might think that the reason I speak in defensive gaming is that I like to game. There's more to gaming than entertainment, though. Gaming teaches kids a lot of important lessons, including lessons about perseverance, problem solving, and collaboration. So if we flip back and we say, okay, what can we identify here? This first part is trying to grab their attention, right? As many of my audience know, I'm a gamer. He's identifying with the audience, saying, hey, you know me, this is what I'm about. And so it's kind of like saying, hey, like, listen up, you know me. So he's identifying that the audience might connect with him already. And then this whole section here, right, is about establishing that there is an argument to be had, right? He's giving some context. Context is just kind of a fancy word for background information. So giving some background information about gaming and his reason for having a position on this issue. And then he launches right into his thesis. So his thesis is gaming teaches kids a lot of important lessons, including lessons about perseverance, problem solving, and collaboration, right? Those are his 3 reasons. So you got his thesis and 3 reasons. He put them all in one sentence. We've been creating 2 sentences for hours. Either way is totally fine. So this is what a strong introduction will look like. Then if we move to a conclusion, it's going to be really similar except for inverse. So you want to restate your claim. You want to review the reasons, right? This is at the very end of your essay, and remind the reader like the most important thing that you want them to think about before they leave. So if you think about all the evidence you've presented, all of the argument that you've made, what is one fact or one idea that you want them to remember? And then, right, if you think about how you want to end things, those are your first 3 sentences. Your last sentence can be any one of these choices. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, you don't have to do all of those things. Pick one of those things. You could talk about how you could leave the reader something to think about, right? And I'll show you the example in a second here of how he does that. You could talk about why this is important and make connections to our real world. What actionable change is happening in our world right now? You could talk about BLM. You could talk about like environment, climate change, personal rights. Like there's lots of discussion about like, is wearing a mask a violation of your personal rights or your First Amendment rights? And so you could talk about just a lot of different ways people are trying to achieve change, or you even think about like political parties and like we're having a big change in our like government. We're going to have a new president this year. Like, how did that happen? How did people, because oftentimes it is very hard for someone who is not the sitting president to win an election, right? And so you could even talk about like just all of the changes that are happening and what goes into making actionable change in our current world in 2020. You could suggest a way that they should think or act. You could talk about how actionable change has developed or shifted over time. You could again remind them that you're being unbiased, or you could offer additional insights into the argument. And so here would be an example of a strong conclusion. This says, so this is, again, it's the same topic, the gaming. There's a lot of reasons that games that include violence can be helpful to kids, including these lessons in teaching kids about perseverance, problem solving, and collaboration. There's one last thought that I leave my audience with. And that is, we don't live in a world that is a lot safer than these games. We live in a world that includes Katrina and Sandy and September 11th and Columbine and Sandy Hook. In case you didn't know, Katrina and Sandy are both hurricanes. September 11th, obviously, we've talked about that in here, was when two planes hit the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers in New York. It was a terrorist attack. And then Columbine and Sandy Hook are two occasions of school shootings. I know, and so then it goes on to say, I know I would want my kid, if something goes bad in his school or his town or his city, to know that he could band together with other kids. He could try to get to safety, and he could use his brains and his courage to help others. All stuff he would have learned from these games. And so if you think about it, here he has restated his thesis and his reasons, right? So this whole section here, this first sentence, accomplishes numbers 1 and 2. And then he, in this section, reminds the reader of the most compelling idea, right? That games are not just about gaming, they have real world implications. And so you can see here that he could use problem solving. And so he's saying, hey, kids can use problem solving if something bad happens in their world. And then he leaves the reader something to think about when he says, like, right, he could try to get to safety and he could use his brains and his courage to help others. All stuff he would have learned from these games. And so it makes it really hard for the reader to argue, because he's saying, hey, think about this, right? I want you, when you leave, I want you to think about how these aren't just games, right? That they can provide a set of learning that maybe kids don't get in the classroom, or a different way of learning for students who, learn in different ways. And so that would be an example of a strong conclusion. The last thing from yesterday was that we talked about was counterclaim. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to acknowledge the opposition. You have to say, hey, some people think differently, right? But then you have to remind your audience that, hey, they're wrong. Like, yep, some people are going to think differently. And I have to acknowledge that, because that makes me credible to understand that there's multiple layers of this argument. But here's why my position that I've taken is correct. Okay, and then you provide one additional piece of evidence and one piece of reasoning. And so then if we look at this example, it says, some people worry that violent games teach kids to be violent. There's evidence, though, to the contrary. So that first sentence is he's saying some people think that violent games aren't good, that they cause violence. But then he's saying, hey, but here's why they're wrong. And then this next section here, he gives a quote from ESA.com, where he says, violent crime, particularly among the young, has decreased. During the same period of time, video games have steadily increased in popularity and use, exactly the opposite of what one would expect if there was a casual link. And then he cites his source, right? And then this whole next section is his reasoning. And so he's just saying, like, here's one additional piece of evidence to show that video games are not about violence necessarily. They're really great for, he goes on to say, any gamer knows that you often play to relax, right? So after playing, you let go of emotions like being upset or angry. And so he just makes comparisons to the fact that, like, it's not about being violent, it's about relaxing and blowing off steam. And so this would be a great example of counterclaim. If we move to today's work, we worked on Lexia, so please make sure that you're keeping up with your Lexia minutes if you're at home. And then we talked about how to cite evidence. And so here is an example of, I just used a different article that we haven't talked about, just so you could see it in another form. But the first time that you use a source, you have to name the article and the full name of the author. So for example, this is an article called Shootout by Guy Martin. After you've introduced the author and the article or the source, you then only use the author's last name. Okay, don't put their full name, it's just their last name. So for like us, it would say, like, according to Martin Luther King Jr. in the letter from Birmingham jail, right? We would put that, but then from then on we would say, additionally, King states that. So you don't have to put his whole name. And then if you're not including all of the cited information, meaning like the author's name or the article title, that goes in parentheses at the end, right? So here, I'm naming the article title, but I didn't name the author, and so I put his name in parentheses. You could switch that to and say Martin illustrates that games valedictorian message is built on its architecture, and then put shootout here in parentheses because that would be the source. So anytime that you don't name it, but you are citing it and using someone else's thinking, you have to give them credit, and you can do that in the parentheses if you don't outright state it in your sentence. And then I just wanted to give you some reminders of transition words. This is a great slide to utilize when you start to like introduce evidence, right? Each one of these tells you like how you can start each body paragraph. This is one way you could start a body paragraph. Here's how you can introduce evidence, and then here are sentences that you could utilize for reasoning. Make sure that your reasoning is double your evidence. You want reasoning to be the biggest section of your writing. And as you can see here, this would be an example of a strong body paragraph. The reason here is highlighted, right? People tell stories to confront needed change. One example of people telling stories is Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. In the text, he says, I want to try and answer your statement in what I hope will be a patient and reasonable terms, right? All of this right here, everything in red is reasoning. So go through as you start to finish up your flash draft, go through and I want you to use these highlights. Highlight any reason for your body paragraphs in green, your evidence in yellow, and your reasoning in red. And then you're going to be able to see your proportions of like, hey, is my reasoning strong? Do I have too much, like, am I using too long of sentences for my evidence? Can I be more concise? Do I need more reasoning? Am I using transitions? And so make sure that you're doing this before we turn in tomorrow. This is a great way to ensure that you have all the necessary components as well. I'll go into some highlighting for counterclaim and introduction and conclusion tomorrow, but for now, just focus on your body paragraphs. Okay, and then the last slide is just some reminders. If you feel like you're starting to get finished, these are just some reminders for your essay. As always, if you have any questions, please email me. You can also schedule a Zoom if you would like, as long as you have like a parent or guardian at home with you as well. But if multiple of you would really like to talk or ask some questions, I can always hold a Zoom after school today or tomorrow during third hour. So again, ask questions, email me, send me a note if you need to talk like face-to-face via Zoom. And I hope everything is going well and you're all staying healthy.